Hello, this is Renee Hahn with William Ravis Real Estate, bringing you the monthly Naples area real estate market update. This month's market update is going to be a little strange for me to deliver. And I say that because the data that we report on, there's always a time lag. So we're going to be talking about March 2022 market data versus March of 2021. Well, because it's already into April and we're in such a fluid, really fast changing market right now, some of what we'll talk about reflectively looking at March has already started to change. And I'll come back around at the tail end of delivering the March information and give you a couple early insights. But in a rapidly changing fluid market, it's always interesting that a relatively short period of time, less than a month, can already have the market behaving differently. So we'll cover March and then we'll move on to a couple anecdotal comments about what I'm already seeing in April. Let's start with inventory. In January, inventory was down 75% year over year. So that was going into the beginning of the year. In February, it was only down 47% year over year. I say only, that's still pretty significant. But this past month in March, we've now closed that gap even a little bit more, and March 2022 over 2021 was only down 24%. So that gap is continuing to shrink as we headed further into the year. Even though March inventory was down year over year, when you compare March versus March, it actually had increased 20% from February 2022 versus March of 2022. So this is some of the early trend. When you hear my market report for April, you're probably going to see this continue to shift. So again, more insights on that in a moment. Let me move on to pending sales. So with overall pending sales, the statistics been a little bit more what I'll call steady month over month when you look at that. So in January, the overall pending sales was down 38% versus January of the year before. In February, there was also a decrease, and it was 35% versus February of the year before. In March, we're also down, but it's only at 35% year over year. And so very similar. Again, that's been a pretty steady statistic compared to some of the others that we'll talk about. Let's talk about median sales price, closed price, sales price, however you want to say that. It's also been holding pretty firm. So if you look the last few months, year over year, January was up 39%, February was up 38%, and March was up 40%. Those are, again, year over year when you compare to last year at the same time. The median closed price in the month of March was $575,000. One thing worth noting is that the month of March, about a third of the homes that were up for sale went through some kind of price decrease. That's not something you saw in the more immediate months, because for a while there, the prices were actually leapfrogging. A house would go under contract. The next person in that community would raise the price by $100,000. They'd sell it. The next person coming on would raise by 100. And there was sort of this leapfrogging going on where each house that came on was pricing it higher and oftentimes getting it. So what you see here is with, what did I say? 1/3 of those that came on during the season in March went through a price decrease. So again, you're starting to see some things starting to shift there as we're getting to that latter part of what we call our high season, which has traditionally been from late the year before, sometimes the beginning of the current year through Easter time. Now let's look at new listings. So January new listings were down 23%, and February they were down 14%, February 2022 versus February 2021. And listen to this, in March, they were only down 4%. So if you look at the number of new listings we had this March versus the prior March, they were only down 4%. That's a pretty big change from where things were at the end of the year going into the new year. Let's look at overall closed sales. So again, I like to give you a little bit of a comparison, because if I'm only giving you March, you don't really have a trend of how it was the month before or 2 months before. So I like to kind of cumulatively talk about it. But with new listings, talked about that. Closed sales, January was down 40% from the prior year. February was down 28%, and March was down 37% year over year. March closed sales were actually up 49.9% from February. So even though they were down 37% compared to March the prior year, month over month from February to March of this year, it was almost a 50% difference. By the way, that's not necessarily unusual, because if you think about season in the traditional sense, if they're closing in March, so that statistic was up, closed sales was up nearly 50% over February, that's because those are the people that were here earlier in the season getting things under contract, and then they were closing in March. Last statistic on here to look at is time on market. So how long is it taking to sell the homes that are on the market? And it's been interesting, a little anecdotal comment from me. Earlier in my reports, I had talked about, sales were up, but inventory was down. What does that mean? It means a greater proportion of the homes that have been marketed for sale were going under contract. Even the homes that were difficult to sell in the past were going under contract because inventory was so long. So if you look at that pent-up demand and the restricted inventory, it's no surprise that in January, it took 69% less time to sell a home in 2022 than it did in January of 2021. February, it was down 70% year over year. And in March, it was down 67% year over year. So 22 days on market for March is still a pretty impressive statistic, especially when you consider in the month of March, things were still going under contract for many desirable homes in 1-2 days. This is a big shift over prior years and a real reflection in how the market was behaving. Before I finish this market report, I want to talk a little bit about the comment I made on the front end that I'm sharing March data, but I'm already starting to see early indications of the shifting in April. Let's talk a little bit about that. When I start search alerts, new property alerts for my clients, I always do them in what's called concierge mode. What does that mean? It means I actually get to see them before I send it to them. It gives me a chance to manually kick out properties that a filter didn't necessarily scrutinize for, but that I know this one may not be a fit. This one certainly isn't what they're looking for, and I can kick those out. So those listings stopping in my mailbox for me to have an opportunity to review them and make some decisions gives me a really good handle on the amount of volume I'm seeing. And I will tell you, in the last 2, potentially 3 weeks, the number of new listings, I could tell very early on, was starting to shift. So here we were coming towards the close of the high season, getting close to April, and all of a sudden demand was starting to fall off naturally because we were coming to an end and people were returning to their homes in the north, the west, the east. And yet all of a sudden, all of these homes were like starting to infiltrate the market. I have a belief that what happened was the owners had been sitting here during the high season, enjoying the best time of year in Naples, seeing the kind of premium prices we're getting. They were staying in the home, so they certainly weren't going to be inconvenienced by selling it out from under them. But then as they began to head back to their homes, they wanted to jump on the bandwagon. And what happened is, as I said, inventory shot up. I don't have a graph readily available to show you, but I pulled one the other day for a listing appointment, and it looked visually like inventory had almost doubled what you were seeing in early April already versus March. So I think you're going to see in the next month's report a shift because of that increase in inventory at a time when the buyer pool and demand was starting to decline. You definitely see things are sitting on the market longer. Even highly desirable properties are going to take a little bit longer to sell because there isn't a line out the door waiting to do multiple offers. I'm seeing many, many more price reductions. I'm seeing homes that are coming back on the market. If you'll remember, last month I reported that 25% of the homes that were going under contract, the shoot and then aim theory, they were bouncing back on. You're going to see buyers slowing down a little bit more, taking their time. They're not necessarily all in town shopping. So I think we're starting to see the beginning indications that we may be over this leapfrog where it's climbing at an unscalable rate. I think you're going to see things start to definitely plateau. The market in Naples is so highly segmented that you may see pockets of dips in pricing and the amount of time it's taking to sell. Again, way too early to declare a trend, but certainly seen some early indications that the market's softening a little. And no surprise, interest rates recently climbed up north of 5%. By the way, 5%'s not as good as the 3 and 4%, but still relative to what historic interest rates have been, is still an attractive market, particularly if people need to borrow and need to buy. But that'll slow some of the buyers down. Obviously, what's going on internationally has some people concerned about the economy, whether it's because of gas prices, whether it's the other byproducts of that kind of event going on in the world. But all of those things have the market settling down a little bit in the Naples area. Now, if you're looking for a home, regardless of what market it is, make sure you're connected with a good agent that has a good pulse on what's going on in the market. And certainly if you're looking to sell, please partner with a experienced agent. One of the things I pride myself on, and I've got statistics that back this up, it's not just cheek service, if you will, lip service. My metrics in terms of how quickly I was selling things and for how much money relative to the competition was just as strong prior to this crazy couple of years we've had. So make sure you're partnering with someone who has demonstrated results outside of the market that we've been in, where homes were selling much, much easier. Thank you for stopping by as always. And if you have any questions or any real estate needs, don't hesitate to reach out to me. Again, Renee Hahn, William Ravis Real Estate. You can find me at www.yournaplesexpert.com or call me at 239-287-2576. Thanks and have a fantastic day.